What do you bring to the table? What do you bring to the table? Life is an eternal givingness, the offering of the cosmic self to the joy of its own fulfillment. You and I are part of this joy, and we find fulfillment only as this joy passes through us to others. Everything moves in circles. We short circuit our own good when we refuse to pass it on. Wow. I wish I'd said those words. Well, actually, I did say them, but I wish that I had written those words. They were written by Ernest Holmes, the founder of religious science. And they laid the foundation for our theme this month. This month, we embark on a grand experiment to prove our ability to live abundantly in all aspects of our lives, to love abundantly in all ways, and to have abundant joy throughout all of our experiences by the very act of being a go-giver rather than a go-getter. A lot of people balk when they hear that the secret to an abundant life is giving. Then again, a lot of people are nowhere near as abundant as they would like to be. Do you find that that's true? And if these words of Holmes that I'm going to read now don't sum it up, I don't know what really does. It's a little long, but stay with me because it's very profound, as most of his writing is. So Holmes says, unless the seed is sown, it cannot bear fruit. There must be a planting time for every harvest. Who gives all, receives all. Who refuses to give, limits the possibility of the greater good returning to him. Love, and you will be loved. Extend joy, and you will become more joyful. The ancient Talmud said, God will doubly guide the already guided. And Jesus, the greatest of the great, said, give, and it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that ye met, it shall be measured to you again. And that's from Luke. We do not give because God needs the gift, but because the giving increases, broadens, and deepens the life of the giver. Nor shall we give from the standpoint of duty. The universe refuses to bargain with us. It already has given us everything it has, but it also has provided the gift of life can be received in its fullness only as it flows through to the fullness of others. How wonderful is this exact balance which God and nature keep. How perfect is the law of God, and how glorious the opportunity to join with the infinite giver in the givingness of the self to the joy of life. Ernest Holmes. So who was here last week? Okay. Remember the stages of spiritual unfoldment that we talked about last week? Do you remember what they were? Okay. They are why me, mortal, which is victim blame consciousness, me. That's the first stage. Second stage is by me, metaphysician, vital phase of growing, but not the end. It's learning to be the co-creator, taking the responsibility for the self. Getting and manifesting is important in this phase. The third phase is through me, the mystic, which is the focus is more on knowing God than manifesting anything in particular, dwelling in the present, surrendering, setting the ego aside so God can express through us. And then the fourth phase is as me, the master, combo of by me, meta, and through me, mystic. And that's the connection with God is so strong that manifestation happens instantly, just like that. Just like Jesus was able to manifest things instantly. This is the embodying of the Christ consciousness, and of course Jesus was that beautiful role model. And remember, he's also told us that this too you can do and more, although we forget that often. And remember I read what Ernest Holmes wrote in the conclusion of the Science of Mind textbook, and I promised myself when I read this, I thought, I should start teaching my Science of Mind classes by reading this first, because I think this is just an awesome section of the textbook. It really does bring it all together. He says, in conclusion, what the world needs is spiritual conviction, following by spiritual experience. You have the conviction first and then the experience. I would rather see a student of this science prove its principles than to have him repeat all the words of wisdom that have ever been uttered. It is far easier to teach the truth than it is to practice it. Okay, to hold one's thoughts steadfastly to the constructive, to that which endures, and to the truth may not be easy in a rapidly changing world, but to the one who makes the attempt, much is guaranteed. I love that. That just sums it all right up there. So, back to last week. Remember we discussed how being a giver to life places us in the through me and as me stages. Do you remember we talked about that? Okay. So, how many of you remember that we had, all three of you, how many of the three of you remember that we had an assignment last week? And do you remember what your assignment was? Do you remember? Rich does. What was our assignment?
To do three acts of kindness or giving.
Okay. Kind of a pay it forward, sort of a pay it forward.
Starbucks where you buy something for the person.
Hey, did you do this?
Every day.
I know I did this, and I was real conscious of practicing this. You know, just the simple things. And we talked about different ways of being a giver. It can be a smile. It can be a kind word to the cashier. It can be opening the door for somebody. It can be letting someone go first at the checkout. It can even be just blessing a side of an accident, perhaps on the road. You know, you can't stop and help, or there's people helping already, but you can bless them as you go by and know that all is well. Lots and lots of ways that we can give. And so last week I told you that we would spend the rest of this month looking at the 5 laws for stratospheric success. And they're all from this little book right here, The Go Giver. And what this book was written about initially is about success in business. And it's written in a parable form. But the laws that it talks about, these 5 laws, they definitely can translate across business lines and into our everyday lives. And so today we're going to look at the first 2, and then, like last week, you're going to have an assignment to apply each one. The 2 laws can be encapsulated with a question, which is the title of this morning's talk, which is, what do you bring to the table? So let's begin with the first law. We'll talk about it a little bit, and then I'll spell it out. In the words of the Go-Giver, he writes, great fortunes in the world have been created by men and women who have had a greater passion for what they were giving, the products, their services, or their ideas, than for what they were getting. But in reality, a lot of people don't buy into this, do they? They don't really operate like this. In fact, they operate from the mindset that says to the fireplace, first give me some heat, and then I'll throw on some logs. Or they'll say to the bank, pay me some interest, and then I'll make a deposit. And of course, that doesn't work very well, does it? Okay. In those instances, and in fact, we realize that life just doesn't work that way, and it's obvious, and it's kind of ridiculous. I've rarely said to my fireplace, you know, come on, heat up, and then I'll give you something to burn. Not going to happen. So, of course, you need to give the wood. You have to give the wood in order to get the heat, and you have to make that deposit if you want to make that interest. But when it comes to living the abundant life, or letting God live and move and have its very being through and as us, we forget. And we turn to our favorite internal radio station, the one we talked about last week. Does anybody remember the call letters for that radio station we talked about last week? It is WIIFM. You got it? What's in it for me? Okay? And here's another one that we also often listen to, which is WDMA, which is where the money at? Right? Here's a little secret I'm going to let you in on. Those who live the abundant life keep their focus on what they're giving, sharing, the value they bring to the world, not on what they're going to get out of it, and that's what is creating their success. So the first law of the stratospheric success, according to the Go-Giver, is this. Your true worth is determined by how much more you give in value than you take in payment. But before you write that down, I have to make a slight adjustment to it because it doesn't quite fit with, it doesn't sit well with me the way it's written. So I'm changing it. My apologies to the authors here. And I'm going to make it so it says spiritually, well, the reason it didn't fit with me because spiritually your true worth isn't dependent on anything, right? Because we're already inherently worthy, just simply being who we are, okay? We're born whole, perfect, and complete. There's nothing we need to do to be that way. So here it is, just a little bit tweaked, okay? And that is, your true ability to create an abundant life is determined by how much more you give in value than you take in payment. Does that sound a little better? I like the way that feels a lot better. Your true ability to create an abundant life is determined by how much more you give in value than you take in payment. The point isn't to have people pay you more, it's to give them more. You give. Why? Because it really is your divine nature. That's what we're here to do. It is our divine nature to do that. And it's not a strategy. It's not, well, I'll do this and then I know I'm going to get that. It's just a way of life. The Go-Giver uses a restaurant as the example when it poses the question, what makes a good restaurant? And the immediate answer is good food, right? Good food makes a good, but that's really only part of the answer, because what if you had good food and lousy service? That would take away from that, wouldn't it? Here's the rest. A bad restaurant tries to give just enough food and service, both in quantity and quality, to justify the money that it takes from a customer. A good restaurant strives to give the most quantity and quality for the money it takes. But a great restaurant strives to defy imagination. Its goal is to provide a higher quality of food and service than any amount of money could possibly pay for. Think about taking it right outside the box. And when I think of a great restaurant, there's two that come to mind actually. I think of Carpe Diem in Napa, which is where we went with my daughter for her wedding. That's a favorite of theirs. And her wedding rehearsal, and then also her birthday just a couple weeks ago. It's kind of out of commission now because of the earthquake, but good news, they're coming back. And I have to say that every time we've been there with my daughter and son-in-law, it's amazing. The owners come out, they greet us, they hug each and every one of us and the whole entire party. They have our table ready and waiting for us. Immediately comes out complimentary champagne for my daughter who's pregnant. They brought her sparkling water, so I mean they're paying attention. They're very attentive. We had just a lovely meal. All of the food was amazing. They made great suggestions, and then at the end, instead of just bringing out a birthday dessert for her, they brought one for everyone at the table and did not charge us. So that's what I think about. They go above and beyond, and people are just, I think, chomping at the bit for them to reopen. They miss them so much. The second one that I can think about when I think about a great restaurant just closed, and that was in Manteca. That was Isidore's, right? Yeah. And again, the best service. They came to your table. They were personable. They wanted to know, everything. You knew who they were. They would go out of their way to bring the right wine. It was just every experience we had at that restaurant was amazing. So, they go the extra mile, and that's what matters. So, as I said, we can't wait for the repairs to be made on the one Carpe Diem up in Napa, because we want to be there. But following this law doesn't necessarily mean that your abundance will increase. According to the Go-Giver, this first law determines your potential for success. Okay, so we've set the level of potential there. It's the second law that determines how abundant you actually are. And the second law says this: your income changed to your abundance. So your abundance is determined by how many people you serve and how well you serve them. Or put another way, your abundance is directly proportional to how many lives you touch. If you want more abundance, you have to find a way to serve more people. It's really quite simple. It also means that there's no limitation on your abundance because you can always find more people to serve. Think Oprah. Here's a great and wonderful spiritual person. How many people has she even invited onto her show that before were relatively unknown, but once they touched the lives in her world, which is global, became incredibly successful. So she is not only exercising this principle, but she's helping others to do that as well. So she's wrapping both of these laws up there too. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. once said, everybody can be great because anybody can serve. Anybody can serve. Another way to say that might be everybody can live abundantly because anybody can give. So, as you know, the restaurants that we loved, they were always packed, weren't they? Every time you drove into those parking lots, it was difficult to find a parking spot. Well, not for us religious scientists because we just created those spots right up front. But for everybody else trying to get in there, they had to park way out back. Yeah. Can anybody think of another business that does this? Any ideas? Think of one that's
Disneyland.
well, Disney guest services, yeah. Nordstrom's customer service. People will pay more for that. Who had us on the edge of our seats this last week, waiting for the unveiling? Apple. How many people does Apple touch? With their new iPhones and their new smartwatch, and they built that anticipation, but they're also about service too. And you remember when you have good service and you tell other people about that, and that brings in more people when you have that service. So let's recap and talk about the application of these laws in our lives. The first law, your true ability to create an abundant life is determined by how much more you give in value than you take in payment. And the second law, your abundance is determined by how many people you serve and how well you serve them. In this book, our hero, his name is Joe, is learning one law a day, and in order to continue to work with the mentor who is teaching him these laws, he has to implement each law every day, or he can't come back and learn the next one. Okay? And he can't just think about it, and he can't just talk about it. He has to apply it in his life. And he has to apply it by the end of the day. So you have the same mission, only you have an entire week to apply just these two laws. So how did Joe do it? At first he had no idea. But knowing he had to do this, to continue moving forward and being mentored, the ideas just came. They came to him. His opportunity to practice the first one came when the representative of a big potential client called, and they called him because he was trying to meet his quota. He's a salesperson, and he's trying to meet his third quarter quota, and he just knew he wasn't going to make it. That's why he was going to this mentor. He gets this call from this client, and they said, "We just want to tell you we're going with this other person because you don't have the experience that we want." And they needed to find someone with more international experience. They hadn't chosen anybody yet, but they just needed someone who had more experience than they did. And of course he was really disappointed because he only had until Friday that week to meet his quota, and he wasn't nearly there. But he remembered what his mentor said, right? And just as he was about to hang up the phone, he remembered he had a stack of business cards in his desk, and one of them was his competitor. And he kept these competitor cards to remind him to stay motivated. Well, these people are out there, so I have to, stay on top. And so he pulled one of them out because he knew that this competitor had much more international experience than he did. And he says, maybe this can help you. So he basically gave this person a link to get his business done, even though he was not going to receive anything from that. Okay? So remember the first law, your true ability to create an abundant life is determined by how much more you give in value than you take in payment. Here he is, helping a competitor, but providing something of value to a potential client with no thought of compensation. The next day, Joe had no idea how to implement the second law to serve more people. But at the end of the meeting of that day, that he learned of this law, his new mentor's assistant gave him a bag of gourmet coffee. When he had arrived to meet with his mentor, he was served this cup of coffee that was the most amazing coffee he'd ever tasted. And so she gave him a bag as he left. And so he went back to the office, and he's thinking, how can I serve more people? But, well, I'll make up the coffee and give everyone a cup of coffee. And that's what he did. He brewed a pot, and he walked around the office, and he served everyone a cup of coffee. The second law, your abundance is determined by how many people you serve and how well you serve them. This is how our hero in the parable implemented the 2 laws. Doesn't have to be big or, crazy, right? I'm thinking how I can do this next week. And I'm determined to do both of these, to practice both these laws in this next week. And I'm going to report back. And so I want you to think how you can, this next week, implement these 2 laws. Think about that. So this is your charge, because I want to hear about this next week. I want everyone to share how they're going to implement these 2 laws. This is your charge. This is your mission. Because this is how you can become a go-giver and prove your ability to live, to love, and to laugh abundantly. And I know that we all can do this. And so it is.